I was 28 years old, exhausted from another sleepless night in the hospice chair beside my mother's bed, when my Aunt Patricia called for the first time in 7 years to tell me that my mother was making a mistake by refusing aggressive treatment, and that she wanted nothing to do with this drama. I had no idea that 17 years later, that same aunt would be calling me from a hospital bed, her voice thin with desperation, begging for the help she'd so coldly denied my mother, or that my response would force me to confront everything I'd learned about forgiveness, family, and the true meaning of compassion during those final months with my mom. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I always love seeing our global community come together. If you enjoy stories about family, forgiveness, and the complicated choices we make when faced with our own mortality, make sure to hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel so you never miss these inspiring true stories. Now, let me take you back to that devastating phone call in 2008, when I was a newly minted social worker, barely making ends meet. And my mother had just received the diagnosis that would change everything. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in the middle of a home visit with an elderly client, Mrs. Chen, who reminded me so much of my own mother with her gentle smile and the way she insisted on making tea even though her hands shook. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I saw my mother's number flash across the screen. I excused myself and stepped into Mrs. Chen's narrow hallway, pressing the phone to my ear with a sense of dread I couldn't quite explain. "Emma, sweetheart," my mother's voice came through, and I could hear immediately that she'd been crying. "I need you to come home. The doctor called with the biopsy results." I was in my car within minutes, my heart hammering against my ribs as I navigated the afternoon traffic from the Bronx back to our small apartment in Queens. My mother, Sarah Martinez, had raised me alone after my father left when I was 3. She'd worked 2 jobs most of my childhood, first as a home health aide during the day, and then cleaning offices at night, making sure I had everything I needed even when it meant she went without. She'd put herself through nursing school when I was in high school, finally landing a position at Mount Sinai that gave us some stability. She was only 53, vibrant and strong, or so I'd thought until she mentioned the lump she'd found 3 weeks earlier. The apartment felt different when I walked in that day, smaller somehow, as if the walls had moved closer together. My mother sat at our small kitchen table, the same one where she'd helped me with homework for years, where we'd shared countless meals and conversations. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, catching the silver that had started threading through her dark hair. She'd laid out 2 cups of coffee, mine with the exact amount of milk and sugar I liked, hers black the way she'd always taken it. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," she said quietly, her hands wrapped around her cup. "It's already spread to my liver and lungs. Dr. Morrison says I have maybe 6 months, possibly a year with aggressive treatment." I felt the floor tilt beneath me, my vision blurring as tears spilled down my cheeks. "Then we do the treatment," I said immediately, reaching for her hand. "We fight this with everything we have. I'll take time off work. I'll move back home. Whatever you need, Mom." She squeezed my hand, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. A kind of peaceful resignation that terrified me more than the diagnosis itself. "I'm not doing the treatment, mija," she said softly. "I've watched what it does to people. The chemo, the radiation, the surgeries. I've held their hands through it all as a nurse. I don't want to spend what time I have left sick from treatments that might only give me a few more months of suffering." "But Mom," I started, my voice breaking. "I want quality time, Emma, not quantity," she continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I want to be myself for as long as possible. I want to see the sunrise, taste my food, have conversations with you that I'll actually remember. I want to die with dignity, on my own terms, surrounded by love, not hooked up to machines in a hospital room. I understood her reasoning. I did. As a social worker, I'd counseled families through similar decisions. But understanding it professionally and accepting it when it was your own mother were two completely different things. We talked for hours that evening, and eventually, I accepted her choice, even though every cell in my body screamed against it. I moved back home the following week, taking a leave of absence from my job to become her full-time caregiver. That's when I made the call to Aunt Patricia. My mother's older sister had always been the successful one in the family, the one who'd married well, moved to Westchester, and built a life that looked nothing like the one my mother and I shared in our modest Queens apartment. Patricia had married Richard Thornton, a corporate lawyer, and they lived in a sprawling colonial house with a pool and a 3-car garage. They had 2 sons who went to private schools and took ski vacations in Aspen. Patricia had reinvented herself after her marriage, trading her Bronx accent for carefully modulated tones, her simple clothes for designer labels, her given name Patricia Martinez for the more refined Patricia Thornton. My mother and Patricia had been close once, when they were young. My mother kept a photo on her dresser of the 2 of them as teenagers, arms around each other, laughing at a forgotten joke. But the distance between them had grown over the years, not just in miles, but in values, in priorities, in the very fabric of their lives. Patricia visited maybe twice a year, always briefly, always with an air of someone checking an obligation off a list. She sent expensive gifts for birthdays and holidays, but she rarely called, and when she did, the conversations were stilted and brief. Still, she was my mother's only sibling, and I hoped, that this diagnosis would bridge the gap between them. I thought blood would matter when it came down to it. I was wrong. "Patricia, it's Emma," I said when she answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm calling about Mom. She's been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis isn't good, and she's decided not to pursue aggressive treatment. She wants to spend her remaining time at home, and I'm going to care for her. But I thought you should know. I thought maybe you'd want to be involved, to spend time with her while we still can." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the television in the background, the clink of ice in a glass. "I see," Patricia said finally, her tone cool and measured. "And how long are we talking about?" 6 months to a year, maybe," I said, my throat tight. "The doctors aren't sure." Another pause, longer this time. "Emma, I'm sorry to hear this, I truly am. But your mother has always been stubborn. She's making a choice here, a choice to give up, to not fight. I can't support that. I've told her for years that she needs to take better care of herself, that she works too hard, that stress kills. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. Or not live with them, as the case may be." I felt as if she'd slapped me through the phone. "Aunt Patricia, she's your sister. She's dying. This isn't about choices or stubbornness. It's about being there for family when they need you most." "I have my own family to think about," Patricia said, her voice hardening. "Richard's up for partner at his firm. The boys have their activities. I'm on 3 different charity boards. I simply don't have the time or emotional bandwidth to deal with this drama. Your mother has always been the martyr, always the one who had to struggle and suffer. Well, I'm not going to enable that anymore. I'm sorry, Emma, but I can't help you with this. You're a social worker. You should understand better than anyone that we can't save people who don't want to be saved." "She's not trying to be saved," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "She's trying to die with dignity, surrounded by love. She's trying to make the most of the time she has left. And she's your sister, Patricia. Your only sister." "She made her choices," Patricia repeated, and I could hear the finality in her voice. "I have to go, Emma. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Give Sarah my best." And she hung up. I stood there in my mother's kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand. unable to process what had just happened. My mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in the soft blue robe I'd given her for Christmas the year before. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, though it had only been days since the diagnosis. She said no, didn't she? My mother asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. My mother walked over and pulled me into a hug, and suddenly I was the one being comforted, the roles reversed in a way that felt fundamentally wrong. It's okay, Mija, she whispered. We don't need her. We have each other, and that's enough. That's more than enough. But it wasn't okay, and we both knew it. I was angry, furious actually, at Patricia's coldness, at her casual dismissal of my mother's life, at her reduction of a terminal illness to drama and choices. I was angry at the injustice of it all, that my mother, who had spent her entire life caring for others, who had sacrificed everything for me, who had worked herself to exhaustion helping strangers, was facing death without the support of her own sister. The next 8 months were the hardest and most precious of my life. I learned to give injections, to manage pain medication, to recognize the signs of distress. I learned to cook my mother's favorite foods and to sit with her through the nights when the pain was too much for sleep. I learned to cherish every good moment, every shared laugh, every story she told me about her childhood, her dreams, her regrets. My mother's friends from the hospital came by regularly, bringing food, sitting with her so I could shower or take a walk, reading to her when her eyes grew too tired. Mrs. Chen, my former client, sent her grandson over twice a week with homemade dumplings. Father Miguel from our church visited every Sunday, praying with my mother and offering comfort that had nothing to do with religion and everything to do with simple human kindness. Patricia never called. She never visited. She sent a fruit basket once, an expensive arrangement from some upscale shop, with a card that read, "Thinking of you," in generic printed script. My mother cried when it arrived, not from gratitude, but from grief over the sister she'd lost long before the cancer came. In late February, 7 months after the diagnosis, my mother's condition deteriorated rapidly. She was in and out of consciousness, her breathing labored, her body shutting down. I called Patricia one last time, my pride completely gone, begging her to come, to say goodbye, to give my mother the closure of seeing her sister one final time. I can't, Patricia said, and I could hear what sounded like a party in the background, laughter and music and clinking glasses. We're hosting Richard's firm's annual gala tonight. It's been planned for months. I'm sure Sarah understands. Tell her I love her. My mother died 3 days later, on a Thursday morning just as the sun was rising. I was holding her hand, and her last words to me were, "I love you, Mija. You made everything worthwhile. Don't be angry at Patricia. She's lost more than she knows." I tried to honor my mother's wish not to be angry, but it was impossible. At the funeral, Patricia showed up in a black designer suit. Her face carefully made up, her grief performed rather than felt. She hugged me briefly, murmured something about how sorry she was, and left immediately after the service, citing some appointment she couldn't miss. She never asked how I was doing, never offered to help with the bills that had piled up despite my mother's insurance, never acknowledged the 8 months I'd spent caring for her sister alone. The years that followed were difficult. I went back to work, threw myself into my career, eventually becoming a supervisor at the social services agency. I bought a small house in Astoria, adopted a cat named Luna, built a life that was quiet and stable and safe. I dated occasionally, but never seriously. I volunteered at the hospice where my mother had spent her final days, helping other families navigate the impossible journey I'd walked alone. I thought about my mother every day, about her strength and grace, about the lessons she'd taught me about compassion and dignity. I thought about Patricia too, though I tried not to. I'd see her name occasionally in the society pages, at some charity event or fundraiser, always perfectly dressed, always smiling. Her sons graduated from Yale and Princeton. Richard made partner, then senior partner. Their life looked perfect from the outside, untouched by the kind of suffering my mother and I had endured. I never reached out to Patricia, and she never reached out to me. We became strangers who happened to share some DNA, connected by nothing more than a few fading photographs and memories of a woman who had loved us both. 17 years passed. I turned 45. I'd been promoted to director of social services at my agency. I'd bought a small cabin upstate where I spent weekends hiking and reading. I'd made peace with my mother's death, though I still kept her photo on my nightstand and talked to her sometimes when I was alone. I'd even made a kind of peace with Patricia's betrayal, or at least I'd learned to live with it, to accept that some wounds never fully heal, but you can learn to function around them. And then, on a Tuesday morning in October, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Emma, it's Patricia. Your Aunt Patricia." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. Her voice sounded different, thinner, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Patricia," I said carefully. "This is unexpected." "I know we haven't spoken in years," she said, and I could hear her struggling to maintain her composure. "I know I have no right to call you, but I'm in the hospital, Emma. Mount Sinai, actually, the same hospital where Sarah worked. They've diagnosed me with stage 4 ovarian cancer. It's spread everywhere. They're saying 6 months, maybe less." I felt a cold shock run through me, followed immediately by a wave of something I couldn't quite name. Not satisfaction exactly, but a grim sense of cosmic irony. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it, at least partially. "Richard left me," Patricia continued, her voice breaking. 6 months ago. He'd been having an affair with his paralegal for 3 years. He took everything in the divorce. The house, most of the money. The boys, they sided with him. They haven't spoken to me since the separation. I'm living in a 1-bedroom apartment in White Plains, and I'm alone, Emma. I'm completely alone, and I'm terrified." I closed my eyes, seeing my mother in that hospital bed, remembering Patricia's words. She made her choices. I thought about the 8 months I'd spent caring for my mother alone, the sleepless nights, the financial strain, the emotional exhaustion. I thought about the funeral Patricia had rushed through, about 17 years of silence. "The doctors want me to start aggressive treatment," Patricia said, her words coming faster now, desperate. "Chemo, radiation, possibly surgery. But I'm so scared, Emma. I don't have anyone to help me through this. I don't have anyone to drive me to appointments or sit with me during treatments or help me when I'm too sick to take care of myself. I know I don't deserve to ask. I know what I did to you and Sarah was unforgivable, but you're the only family I have left. You're a social worker. You help people through this kind of thing. Please, Emma. I'm begging you. I need help. I need you." I sat there in my quiet kitchen, Luna purring on my lap, the morning sun streaming through the windows of the home I'd built for myself. I thought about my mother's last words. "Don't be angry at Patricia. She's lost more than she knows." I thought about the work I did every day, helping families navigate crisis and illness and death. I thought about the person my mother had raised me to be, the values she'd instilled in me about compassion and forgiveness, and the importance of showing up for people even when it's hard. And I thought about Patricia's voice on the phone 17 years ago, cold and dismissive. She made her choices. "I can't help you with this drama." "Patricia," I said quietly, my heart pounding. "Do you remember what you said to me when I called to tell you Mom was dying? Do you remember what you said when I begged you to come see her one last time?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "I remember," she whispered finally. I said she made her choices. I said I couldn't help with the drama. I said terrible things, Emma. I know I did. I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. You were wrong, I agreed. You abandoned your sister when she needed you most. You dismissed her suffering as drama. You prioritized a party over saying goodbye to her. You left me to care for her alone, to watch her die alone, to grieve alone. Do you have any idea what that was like for me? I was 28 years old, Patricia. I'd just started my career. I had my whole life ahead of me. But I put everything on hold because that's what you do for family. That's what love means, and you couldn't even be bothered to visit. I know, Patricia said, and she was crying now. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Emma. I was selfish and cruel and blind. I thought I was too important, too busy, too sophisticated to deal with illness and death. I thought I'd built this perfect life that was above all that messiness. But it was all a lie. My marriage was a lie. My relationships with my sons were superficial. My whole existence was built on appearances and status and things that don't matter at all when you're facing death. Your mother tried to tell me that once, years ago, but I wouldn't listen. I wouldn't listen to anyone. And now I'm paying the price for that. I'm alone, just like I left her alone. I deserve this. I know I do. But please, Emma, please don't make me go through this by myself. I'll do anything. I'll apologize 1,000 times. I'll try to make amends somehow. Just please don't abandon me the way I abandoned Sarah. I felt tears running down my own cheeks now. Years of pain and anger and grief welling up inside me. Part of me wanted to tell Patricia exactly what she could do with her apology. Wanted to hang up and let her experience the same isolation and fear my mother had faced. Part of me wanted justice. Wanted her to understand viscerally what she'd put us through. But there was another part of me. The part my mother had shaped and nurtured. The part that had spent 17 years helping other families through exactly this kind of crisis. That part knew that revenge wouldn't heal anything. That causing Patricia the same suffering wouldn't bring my mother back or erase the past. That part remembered my mother's grace and forgiveness, her ability to see beyond hurt to the flawed, frightened human beings we all are. Patricia, I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears. I'm not going to abandon you. I'm not going to leave you to face this alone, even though that's what you did to us. But I need you to understand something. I'm not doing this because you deserve it. I'm not doing this because I've forgiven you. Because honestly, I don't know if I ever fully will. I'm doing this because my mother taught me that we help people not because they've earned it, but because it's the right thing to do. I'm doing this because I'm a social worker and this is what I do. I'm doing this because I'm Sarah Martinez's daughter, and she raised me to be better than my anger. Thank you, Patricia breathed. Thank you, Emma. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, I told her. But here's what's going to happen. I'm going to help you navigate this, but we're going to do it my way. You're going to be honest with your doctors about your fears and your wishes. You're going to make informed decisions about your treatment, not just do what they tell you because you're scared. You're going to let me connect you with support services, with counseling, with the resources you need. And Patricia, you're going to talk to me, really talk to me, about Mom, about what happened, about everything you've kept buried for 17 years. Because if we're going to do this, we're going to do it honestly. No more pretending, no more avoiding the hard conversations. Can you agree to that? Yes, Patricia said immediately. Yes, I can do that. I want to do that. I need to do that. Okay, I said, already mentally shifting into professional mode, making a list of what needed to be done. Tell me which hospital you're at and who your oncologist is. I'll make some calls, get your records, and come see you this afternoon. We'll figure this out together, Patricia. You won't be alone. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in my kitchen, staring at my mother's photo on the shelf above the table. I hope I'm doing the right thing, Mom, I whispered. I hope this is what you would have wanted. That afternoon, I drove to Mount Sinai, the same hospital where my mother had worked for years, where she'd cared for countless patients with the same compassion and skill she'd shown in everything she did. I found Patricia's room on the oncology floor, and when I walked in, I barely recognized the woman in the bed. The Patricia I remembered had been polished and put together, always perfectly dressed and made up, her hair styled, her nails manicured, her bearing confident and slightly superior. The woman in the hospital bed looked small and frightened, her hair thin and graying, her face bare of makeup and lined with pain and fear. She wore a faded hospital gown, and her hands, resting on top of the thin blanket, were trembling. "Emma," she said when she saw me, and her face crumpled. "You came. You actually came." I pulled a chair up beside her bed and sat down, taking in the monitors and IV lines, the medical paraphernalia that had become so familiar to me during my mother's illness. "I said I would," I replied simply. "Now tell me everything. What exactly have the doctors said? What are your treatment options? What are you most afraid of?" And Patricia talked. She talked for hours about the diagnosis, about her terror of the treatments, about her estranged sons and failed marriage, about the loneliness that had been crushing her for years. But more than that, she talked about my mother, about their childhood together in the Bronx, about the closeness they'd once shared and how she'd let it slip away in pursuit of a life she thought was better. "I was so ashamed," Patricia admitted, tears streaming down her face. "Ashamed of where we came from, ashamed of being poor, ashamed of the struggle. When I married Richard, I thought I was escaping all that. I thought if I could just be different enough, sophisticated enough, successful enough, I could leave that life behind completely. But in doing that, I left Sarah behind too. I left behind the one person who loved me unconditionally, who knew me better than anyone. And I can never get that back, Emma. I can never apologize to her. I can never tell her how sorry I am or how much I loved her despite everything." "She knew you loved her," I said quietly, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. "She was hurt by your choices, but she never stopped loving you. Her last words to me were about you, actually. She told me not to be angry at you, that you'd lost more than you knew." Patricia sobbed at that, deep, wrenching cries that seemed to come from the very core of her being. I handed her tissues and waited, letting her grief pour out, understanding that this was part of what needed to happen if any healing was going to be possible. Over the following weeks, I kept my promise. I went with Patricia to her oncology appointments, helped her understand her treatment options, advocated for her with her medical team. I connected her with a therapist who specialized in terminal illness, with a support group for cancer patients, with home health services for the days when she'd be too sick from chemo to care for herself. I organized her medications, created schedules, made sure she had food in her apartment, and someone to check on her regularly. But I also made her talk. We spent hours in her small apartment, drinking tea and having the conversations we should have had years ago. Patricia told me about her marriage, about how Richard had become increasingly distant over the years, how she'd built her entire identity around being Mrs. Richard Thornton and lost herself completely in the process. She told me about her sons, about how she'd pushed them toward achievement and status rather than connection and authenticity, and how they'd learned those lessons so well that they could now discard her as easily as she'd once discarded my mother. "I taught them that love is conditional," Patricia said one afternoon, her voice hollow with regret. "I taught them that people are only valuable if they're successful, if they're useful, if they fit into the right social circles. And now they've applied that lesson to me. I'm no longer useful. I'm no longer the successful, well-connected mother they could be proud of. I'm just a sick, divorced woman living in a mediocre apartment. So they've moved on, just like I taught them to. I wanted to argue with her, to tell her she was being too hard on herself, but I couldn't. There was too much truth in what she was saying. You can't change the past, Patricia, I said instead. You can't undo the choices you made or the relationships you damaged. But you can choose differently now. You can choose to face this with honesty and grace. You can choose to let people help you, to be vulnerable, to admit when you're scared or in pain. That's what Mom did. She didn't hide from her death or pretend it wasn't happening. She faced it head on, with dignity and openness. You can do the same. The chemotherapy was brutal. Patricia lost her hair, lost weight, spent days too nauseated to eat or drink. I was there for the worst of it, holding her hair when she vomited, helping her to the bathroom when she was too weak to walk alone, sitting with her through the long, dark nights when the pain and fear were overwhelming. I did all the things I'd done for my mother, and sometimes it felt like I was reliving that nightmare all over again. But there were differences too. Patricia was grateful in a way she'd never been before, thanking me constantly, apologizing repeatedly, trying in small ways to make amends. She started writing letters to her sons, not asking them to come back or forgive her, but simply telling them she loved them and was sorry for the mother she'd been. She made donations to the hospice where my mother had spent her final days, setting up a fund in my mother's name to help families who couldn't afford end-of-life care. She asked me to tell her stories about my mother's final months, crying as I described the kindness of friends and strangers, the grace with which my mother had faced death. She was always the better person, Patricia said one evening as we sat in her apartment, the winter sun setting outside her window. Even when we were kids, Sarah was the one who helped people, who saw the best in everyone. I was always the ambitious one, the one who wanted more, who was never satisfied. I thought that made me stronger, smarter. But really, I was just shallow. Sarah understood what mattered, and I never did. Not until now, when it's too late. It's not too late, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. You're still here, Patricia. You still have time to be the person you wish you'd been. 6 months into Patricia's treatment, something unexpected happened. Her cancer responded better than anyone had anticipated. The tumors shrank significantly. Her energy improved. Her oncologist cautiously suggested that she might have more time than they'd initially thought, possibly years rather than months if the treatment continued to work. Patricia wept when she got the news, but they weren't tears of pure joy. I don't deserve this, she told me, her face twisted with guilt and grief. Sarah didn't get more time. She didn't get a second chance. Why do I? Life isn't fair, I said simply. You know that as well as anyone. But if you're getting more time, Patricia, then you need to use it well. You need to make it mean something. And slowly, carefully, she began to try. She reached out to old friends she'd dropped when she married Richard, people from the old neighborhood who remembered the Patricia Martinez she'd been before she became Patricia Thornton. Some responded, some didn't, but she kept trying. She volunteered at a cancer support center, using her experience to help newly diagnosed patients navigate the terror and confusion she'd been through. She started attending a church in her neighborhood, not the prestigious one in Westchester where she'd gone with Richard, but a small, humble place where people knew struggle and loss. And she kept talking to me, kept working on our relationship, kept trying to bridge the gap that 17 years of silence had created. It wasn't easy. There were days when I resented her, when I looked at her and saw only the woman who'd abandoned my mother. There were moments when her gratitude felt performative, when I questioned whether she was truly changed or just scared of dying alone. But there were other moments too. Moments of genuine connection, when I'd see flashes of the aunt my mother had loved, The sister who'd existed before pride and ambition had poisoned everything. 2 years after that first phone call, Patricia's cancer went into remission. Her doctors were cautiously optimistic, talking about long-term survival, about her being one of the lucky ones. We celebrated quietly, just the two of us, in her small apartment that had become familiar to me over the months of treatment and recovery. "I don't know how to thank you," Patricia said that evening, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved my life, Emma, not just by helping me through the treatment, but by showing me what real love looks like. You gave me something I didn't deserve and hadn't earned. You showed me the kind of person Sarah was, the kind of person she raised you to be. I spent my whole life chasing the wrong things, valuing the wrong things, and you showed me what actually matters. Mom would have done the same for you," I said, and I realized as I spoke that it was true. Despite everything, despite the hurt and abandonment, my mother would have helped Patricia if she'd asked. That was who she was, who she'd always been. She would have helped you because that's what love does. It shows up. It stays. It forgives, even when forgiveness seems impossible. "I wish I could tell her that," Patricia whispered. "I wish I could tell her I finally understand." "Maybe you can," I said. "Maybe we can go together, to the cemetery. You can tell her there." The following Sunday, we drove to the cemetery in Queens where my mother was buried. It was a beautiful spring day, the kind my mother had always loved, with cherry blossoms blooming and birds singing in the trees. We stood together at her grave, Patricia and I, connected by loss and regret, and the slow, painful process of healing. Patricia knelt beside the headstone, her hand trembling as she traced my mother's name carved in granite. "I'm sorry, Sarah," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not being there when you needed me. For being too proud and stupid to see what mattered. For wasting years on things that meant nothing and ignoring the one relationship that meant everything. You were always the better person, the stronger person, the one who understood what love really was. I wish I could have told you that before you died. I wish I could have been the sister you deserved." I knelt beside her, placing my hand on her shoulder, feeling her body shake with sobs. "She knew you loved her, Patricia," I said gently. "She was hurt, but she never stopped loving you. And she'd be glad, I think, that we found our way back to each other. That's what she would have wanted, for us to be family again." Patricia turned to me, her face wet with tears, and pulled me into a fierce hug. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for being bigger than your anger, for being the person Sarah raised you to be. Thank you for teaching me what forgiveness looks like, even when I didn't deserve it." We stayed there for a long time, the two of us talking to my mother, telling her about the years she'd missed, about the ways we'd both changed and grown. And I felt something shift inside me, some weight I'd been carrying for 17 years finally beginning to lift. The anger wasn't gone completely. The hurt wasn't erased, but it was softer now, less sharp, less consuming. As we walked back to the car, Patricia asked, "Emma, can I ask you something? Why did you help me? Really? I know what you said on the phone that first day, about doing it because it was the right thing, about being Sarah's daughter. But there must have been part of you that wanted to refuse, that wanted me to suffer the way you and Sarah suffered. Why didn't you?" I thought about that question for a long moment, considering my answer carefully. There was a part of me that wanted to refuse, I admitted. There was a part of me that wanted you to feel exactly what we felt, to understand through experience what you'd put us through. But then I realized something. If I'd refused to help you, if I'd abandoned you the way you abandoned us, I wouldn't have been honoring Mom's memory. I would have been betraying everything she taught me, everything she believed in. She believed that we help people because they need help, not because they deserve it. She believed that compassion isn't something you earn, it's something you give freely, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I paused, looking back at the cemetery, at the place where my mother rested. And honestly, Patricia, I didn't want to become you. I didn't want to be the person who lets pride and anger make their decisions, who values being right over being kind. I didn't want to look back years from now and regret not helping someone who needed me, the way you regret not helping Mom. So I chose differently. I chose to be the person Mom raised me to be, even though it was hard, even though part of me didn't want to. Because that's what love does. It chooses compassion over comfort, forgiveness over revenge, connection over pride. Patricia nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. Your mother raised an extraordinary person, she said quietly. I hope you know that. I hope you know how lucky the world is to have you in it. 3 years have passed since that phone call from the hospital. Patricia remains in remission, defying the odds that once gave her only months to live. Our relationship has continued to evolve, growing deeper and more authentic with time. She's become a real aunt to me now, not the distant superior figure of my childhood, but a genuine family member who shows up, who listens, who cares. She's rebuilt some relationships with her sons, though those connections remain complicated and fragile. They're learning, slowly, to see her as a real person, rather than just the mother who disappointed them. She's created a new life for herself, one built on authenticity and service rather than status and appearance. She volunteers 20 hours a week at the cancer center, mentors newly diagnosed patients, and has become an advocate for accessible end-of-life care. Last month, Patricia helped me organize a fundraiser for the hospice where my mother spent her final days. We raised over $50,000, enough to provide free care for several families who couldn't otherwise afford it. At the event, Patricia spoke publicly for the first time about her sister, about the mistakes she'd made and the lessons she'd learned. She talked about my mother's grace and compassion, about the example she'd set and the legacy she'd left. Sarah Martinez was a better person than I'll ever be, Patricia told the crowd, her voice strong despite the tears streaming down her face. She understood something I spent most of my life not understanding, that our worth isn't measured by our wealth or status or achievements. It's measured by how we treat people, especially people who can't do anything for us in return. She lived that truth every day of her life, and she raised a daughter who embodies those same values. I'm alive today because that daughter chose compassion over revenge, forgiveness over anger. I'm alive because Sarah's legacy lives on in Emma, in the countless people Emma has helped through her work, in the ripple effects of one woman's commitment to living with integrity and love. As I listened to Patricia speak, I felt my mother's presence so strongly it was almost physical. I imagined her there beside me, proud not just of what I'd done, but of what Patricia had become, of the healing that had happened between us. I thought about her last words, about not being angry at Patricia, about Patricia having lost more than she knew. My mother had been right, as she so often was. Patricia had lost years with her sister, had lost the chance to know her own nephews, had lost herself in a life that looked impressive but felt empty. But she'd found her way back, not to the life she'd lost, but to something better, something real. And I'd found my way to a kind of peace I hadn't known was possible, a peace that came not from forgetting the past, but from choosing how to respond to it, from deciding that I would be defined by my compassion rather than my anger. I still miss my mother every day. I still wish she'd had more time. Wish she'd been able to see Patricia's transformation. Wish she'd known that her sister finally understood what she'd been trying to teach her all along. But I also know that my mother's legacy lives on. not just in me, but in Patricia. In the patients we help, in the families we support, in every choice we make to show up for people even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. What an incredible journey this has been, from that devastating phone call 17 years ago to the relationship Patricia and I have built today. Her story reminds us that it's never too late to change, never too late to choose differently, never too late to become the person you wish you'd been all along. But it also reminds us that transformation requires more than just regret or fear. It requires action, honesty, humility, and the courage to face the consequences of our choices. Have you ever been faced with a choice between compassion and revenge, between helping someone who hurt you and letting them face the consequences alone? What would you have done in my situation? Would you have helped Patricia after she abandoned my mother? Or would you have let her experience the same isolation she'd inflicted on us? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear about your experiences with forgiveness, family, and the complicated choices we make when faced with someone else's suffering. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that compassion isn't about giving people what they deserve, but about choosing who you want to be, please show your support by hitting that like button. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our inspiring stories about real people whose choices to forgive, to help, and to love changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.